What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS4 and PS5 jailbreak news update. Primarily going to be focusing here on PS5 updates because that's what we have the most information on here right now. So there has been some pretty significant information that's just dropped today. This has been brewing over the past few weeks, but you know, there wasn't really enough stuff to really, I feel like, make a video on at the time, but now we have something pretty significant that's dropped right here. So I'm going to go into all of the information, including stuff that's built up to this over the past few weeks right here in this video. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So today we got a tweet from not Zekoshal or Control Execute on Twitter. He just says LMFAO and he leaves a link here to a non-PSP Bootroms. So PSP is the platform security processor, which I think is been renamed to AMD-SP, which is the security processor in AMD CPUs, and these are boot ROMs for Zen and Zen 2 processors. Now the PS5 uses a Zen 2 based CPU, which means that this likely could affect the PS5. So as put by Zekoshal himself down here, he says Zen 1 and Zen 2 boot ROMs, PS5 APU is a custom Zen 2 Ryzen chip. This is extremely important to reverse engineer and find ways to dump the PS5 boot ROM. Okay, so before we actually get into the details here, we need to kind of take a step back and look at what the actual AMD-SP or PSP is. So AMD-SP Secure Processor, or PSP, which is the Platform Security Processor, not to be confused, of course, with Sony's PlayStation Portable Console. Completely different thing. So basically, the PSP is responsible for kind of managing the boot up process of the device. So essentially it's responsible for managing it as well as, I believe, securing it. It works in conjunctions with things like TPM modules and hardware-based cryptography and all of that kind of stuff to basically try and create a secure environment for the system. So that's essentially, you know, the kind of, you know, puddle deep explanation of what this thing actually is. Obviously, there's a lot more information than that. You can get right into the weeds on it if you want. Because Spectre has, in fact, been trying to reverse engineer the secure processor or try and gain as much information as he can about it. Of course, Spectre being one of the hackers in the PS4 and PS5 scene for quite some time now, who has released jailbreaks in the PS4 in the past. He's basically got a two-part series going into detail on the PSP in depth. I'll go ahead and leave it down in the video description if you want to read through it in its entirety. But basically, as you can see here from the general description, AMD's secure processor, formerly known as Platform Security Processor or PSP, is a very interesting piece of technology that is critical to the operation of all modern-day AMD CPUs. There's also very little public information about it, and because of that, it's commonly misunderstood or fantasized about. Not only is it at the top of the chain of trust, but it's also responsible for initializing the CPU and facilitating attestation, TPM, hardware accelerated crypto, and secure encrypted visualization SEV technology. So the important thing to mention right there is the fact that it's at the top of the chain of trust. So when you're trying to jailbreak a PS4 or a PS5, you're always looking to escalate privileges, and the best way to do that is to try and get to the lowest layer in the actual stack, which is normally on the PS4 would be the kernel. If you can get down and exploit the kernel, which is at the lowest layer, then once you've got control over that, you then have control over everything that sits on top of the kernel in the stack, giving you basically full control of the PS4. Now, the problem with the PS5 is the kernel isn't deep enough. You also have the hypervisor that sits below the kernel. So even if you exploit the kernel, which we do have a kernel exploit on the PS5 right now, up to firmware 4.51, we still don't have full control because the hypervisor sits below that layer and can still restrict what we're able to do, even though we have access to the kernel. So if we had a hypervisor exploit, then we would have full control over the system because it would be below everything else and we would have control of everything above it. That's essentially what we're looking for. Now, the thing with the PSP is it actually runs in the boot up process, in the boot mode of the system. And it's at the top of the chain of trust, which basically means if you could exploit that and gain control over that, you would get control over everything else, essentially. You could do a hell of a lot of stuff, maybe custom firmware, who knows. Although this would probably require some kind of hardware level exploit, which is probably why we've been seeing hackers in the scene trying to get hold of specific hardware, like these AMD 4700S defective PlayStation 5 chips resurrected. These are basically mini ITX computers that are using PS5 chips that are not suitable to be put in a PS5 because either they lost the silicon lottery or they have some kind of defect in them that makes them not suitable to be put in a PlayStation 5 console, but they repurpose them into these mini ITX builds that they sold. So, you know, if you could get your hands on this would be a great test platform to test, you know, potential hardware exploits or some exploits or vulnerabilities in AMD's PSP. So that's the general idea, because if you could exploit this and gain control over the whole boot mode or boot up process, given the fact that this thing is the highest trust level on the system, then you would essentially be kind of bypassing the hypervisor in a way, or you can think of it as it sitting lower in the stack than the hypervisor. So you get control of that, you get control of everything else. So pretty interesting stuff. But obviously there's not been a whole load of stuff that's come out about this at the moment. There was this article from wololo.net back in April, which goes over some of the vulnerabilities that were released that could affect the PSP. So there was a CVE right here, insufficient control flow management in AMD CPM OEM SMM may allow a privileged attacker to tamper with the SMM handler, which is the secure management mode handler, potentially leading to an escalation of privileges. We also have insufficient control flow management in AMD CPU GPIO initialize system management mode, may allow a privileged attacker to tamper with the system management mode handler, potentially leading to an escalation of privileges. So there has been a couple of sort of vulnerabilities in the past, and that could be the kind of things that were being looked into by the various hackers in the scene who are looking to try and exploit this. However, now that we actually have the boot ROMs that have just dropped, this could give a hell of a lot more information to the hackers trying to exploit this. You know, it could lead to new vulnerabilities and a better understanding of this, which could ultimately lead to some kind of potential PS5 jailbreak in the future. So yeah, still a pretty big deal overall. So I definitely wanted to go ahead and mention that here in this video, because this has been building up for a while. You can see April 17th with Spectre talking about this, investigating the PSP. We had Null Pointer, who was looking for donations to get certain equipment. By the looks of things, this 4700S. Now we actually have a bit of a breakthrough with boot ROMs being released, providing that this actually does benefit the PS5. Hopefully it does. Spectre hasn't really come out and said anything at the time of recording about this. You can see here, Spectre, when your ass wakes up, you're going to have a field day with this. Let's hope so. So maybe I'm a bit premature making this video now. Maybe I should have waited for Spectre to make a statement about this. So hopefully he doesn't come out and say, actually, this is useless for PS5. Hopefully not. Hopefully this will pertain to the PS5 and should lead to some interesting developments. So definitely want to go ahead and mention that here in this video. A couple of other things to bring up though. Since I'm on this topic anyway, another thing to quickly mention here is that 8 days ago, there was a bug bounty report from CTURT that was closed, which apparently resulted in a $10,000 bounty, although we can't be, I believe, 100% sure if it was awarded to CTURT, because there was another report that ended around the same time. But the overall awarded bounty amounts went up by $10,000, which is the going rate for a jailbreak, like a kernel exploit in the PS4 or PS5. So that would suggest that that's potentially what it was. But the reason why I don't generally do dedicated videos now about reports, especially from CTURT, is because none of his reports really get disclosed. Usually when the flow reports something, it will get disclosed within, 6 months to a year or so after the report. However, with CTURT, none of his reports have been disclosed, which either means that they're so severe Sony doesn't want to allow them to be disclosed, or perhaps CTURT just hasn't been requesting disclosure, which of course is his right. It's up to him. So anyway, just thought I'd mention it here since I'm doing a video about this topic anyway. Okay, so the last thing that I want to leave you guys with here is there's something that I do really want to talk about, but unfortunately I can't for reasons that I can't really get into about the whole scene generally. But what I'll say instead here is that if you look at the Nintendo Switch hacking scene and some of the stuff that's been going on lately, with the fact that, of course, you've got Lockpick RCM that was DMCA'd by Nintendo, removed. That was the kind of payload that would allow you to get your keys from your Nintendo Switch, your encryption keys. However, a few days later, we get Picklock RCM. Picklock RCM, again, basically the same thing. Nintendo Switch encryption keys allows you to get them. And as you can see here, the release says DMCA fix with a little shrug emoji Works on 16.0.2, I guess the latest firmware for the Switch. I've not really been in the Switch scene lately. And yeah, there you go. It's just kind of like a screw you Nintendo mentality that the hackers in the Switch scene seem to have. And all I'll say is I just wish that the people in the PlayStation hacking scene had the same kind of mentality. We'll leave it at that. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.